Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of UAP Revisited, the podcast. I intend to make these shorter podcast episodes in between my bigger video projects. What I plan to do is take all the information I can from various cases and put it together here that I could tell in story form. The idea is you can listen to this with just the audio. There will be a visual aspect on the screen, but no information will be presented there that's not in the narration as well. I figure I will tell the story and then maybe give a quick little chat about my thoughts on it at the very end. So with that being said, let's get right into episode 1, The Lights over Stephenville. On the evening of January 8th, 2008, the landscape around Stephenville, Texas looked much as it always had. Stephenville was a quiet agricultural community southwest of Fort Worth, surrounded by open fields, cattle ranches, and long stretches of unobstructed sky. It was the kind of place where people were accustomed to seeing aircraft. Military jets operated from bases in the wider region, private pilots flew regularly, and many residents had spent their lives watching weather systems and aircraft move across the horizon. But shortly after sunset, something appeared in the sky that a number of witnesses said looked and moved unlike anything they had ever seen before. Over the next several hours, residents around Stephenville and the neighboring community of Dublin reported brilliant lights, an enormous silent object, and military jets racing through the darkness. The event would become one of the most heavily publicized American UFO cases of the early 2000s. And unlike many sightings, the Stephenville incident would eventually involve not only eyewitness testimony, but radar data as well. This is the story of the Stephenville Lights. At around 6 o'clock that evening, local businessman and private pilot Steve Allen was outside near the town of Selden, southeast of Stephenville. Allen was gathered with several friends when they noticed intensely bright lights in the eastern sky. According to his later account, the lights initially seemed distant, but they began approaching rapidly. They were not arranged like the standard navigation lights of an airplane. Allen described the illumination as unusually brilliant, with the lights appearing to change their pattern and configuration as the object moved. The group watched as the lights came closer. Allen, who was familiar with aircraft, tried to judge the object's distance, speed, and size. His estimates would later become some of the most dramatic associated with the case. He described what he saw as an enormous, possibly hundreds of meters across, and said that it moved silently despite its apparent size and proximity. Allen later said the experience affected him deeply. He did not claim to know whether the object was extraterrestrial, military, or something else, but he was convinced that it was not an ordinary aircraft. The following morning, unable to stop thinking about what he had witnessed, Allen contacted the local newspaper, the Stephenville Empire Tribune. His calls were answered by reporter Angela Joyner. Joyner was not a UFO researcher. She had previously worked as a school teacher and had been reporting for the paper for less than 2 years, but Allen struck her as credible. He was a local businessman, an experienced observer, and a pilot. When she contacted the other people who had been with him, they confirmed the central elements of his story. Joyner began asking whether anyone else had seen something unusual that night, and now the telephone started ringing. One of those witnesses was Erith County Constable Leroy Gayton. Gayton was at home when he noticed unusual lights outside. His family also observed them. He described the lights that appeared to move, separate, and rearrange themselves in the sky. At times they seemed to form an arch or an elongated pattern. Like Allen, Gayton said he could not hear any kind of engine noise that he would expect from the conventional aircraft. As a law enforcement officer, Gayton understood what publicly reporting a UFO sighting might do to his reputation. Nevertheless, he described what he believed he had honestly observed. His involvement immediately gave the story additional weight. The witnesses were no longer limited to anonymous callers. They included a pilot, a police officer, business owners, and other established members of the local community. Several miles away, near Dublin, machinist Ricky Sorrells reported an even stranger encounter. Sorrells said that he had been outside on his property when he noticed something overhead. Through gaps in the trees, he described seeing a large, flat, metallic object hovering roughly 300 feet above a pasture. It appeared enormous. Unlike the distant lights described by some witnesses, Sorrells believed he was looking at the physical surface of a structured object. He said it was close enough that he attempted to determine its shape, but the object extended beyond his field of view. Initially, some of his friends mocked him when he told them the story. Sorrells considered remaining silent. It was only after reading that the other residents had reported unusual objects in the same area that he agreed to speak publicly. Knowing that others had seen something, he said, made him feel that he was not imagining the experience. The accounts were not identical. Some people described a solid object, others saw only bright lights. Estimates of the object's size vary dramatically, as did descriptions of its shape and direction. That inconsistency is important. Eyewitnesses observing distant lights at night can easily misjudge altitude, size, and speed. Without a fixed reference point, a nearby small object may appear like something enormous and far away, or the reverse. Memory can also shift as witnesses compare stories and absorb media coverage. But despite those limitations, several recurring details appeared across the Stephenville reports. The object or lights were described as unusually bright. They appeared to move silently. They seemed capable of rapid acceleration, and several witnesses said military jets appeared shortly afterward. The military initially complicated the mystery. When reporters contacted Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base Fort Worth, officials reportedly said that no military aircraft had been operating in the area that evening. The statement appeared to support the witnesses. If the lights had not been military aircraft, then what were they? But approximately 2 weeks later, the military corrected its original response. Officials acknowledged that 10 F-16 fighter aircraft had in fact been conducting training operations in the wider Stephenville area on January 8th. The base attributed the earlier denial to an internal communication error. Now to skeptics, this new statement provided a straightforward explanation. Residents probably saw military jets, bright lights, doing things with flares at night. Multiple aircraft together in formation could easily have created the illusion of one large object, especially when you add atmospheric conditions distorting their appearance even further. But to many witnesses, the military reversing their position had the opposite effect. They already knew they had saw military jets, so now the military confirming the presence of F-16s didn't necessarily explain the unusual object, it just confirmed what they already knew, that jets were in the sky at the same time. The question came simply not whether military aircraft were present, but whether something else was present with them. The case might have remained a collection of intriguing but inconclusive witness statements if investigators had not obtained radar records. Through Freedom of Information Act requests, researchers Glenn Schultz and Robert Powell acquired data from the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Weather Service. Their analysis drew on information from 5 radar facilities covering the region. The resulting report attempted to match radar targets with the times, locations, and directions described by witnesses. First, the investigators identified conventional traffic wherever possible. Commercial aircraft carrying transponders could generally be distinguished from other radar returns. Military aircraft were also tracked and compared with known flight activity. The researchers then examined unidentified primary radar targets, returns that appeared on radar without an accompanying transponder signal. According to the report, radar showed substantial military activity in the area. 10 F-16s were documented during the relevant period, confirming the military's revised statement. The analysis also identified an unknown radar target, whose reported path appeared broadly consistent with portions of the eyewitness testimony. The target was detected southeast of Stephenville and was interpreted by the report's authors as traveling toward the region surrounding President George W. Bush's ranch near Crawford, Texas. At certain points, the radar returns suggested rapid movement. At others, the targets appeared slower or intermittent. The investigators concluded that radar information supported the likelihood that something unidentified had been present in the area, but they did not claim that the data proved the existence of an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Radar returns can have numerous causes. Any aircraft operating without active transponders, various weather effects, equipment artifacts, birds, propagation anomalies can all create confusing signals. The report also involves interpretation, so matching a particular radar target with visual sightings requires assumptions about timing, altitude, and witness direction. So not every unidentified return necessarily represents the same object or even a physical craft. Nevertheless, the radar evidence now made Stephenville more difficult to dismiss. As national media arrived, the quiet Texas town found itself at the center of a spectacle. Now television crews had filled the streets, UFO researchers interviewed residents, and reporters arrived from across the United States and even overseas. But the sudden attention carried consequences. Witnesses were now mocked, some avoided reporters entirely, others worried about speaking publicly could damage their jobs or standing in the community. Angela Joyner continued investigating and reporting on the sightings. Her work transformed a local story into an international one, but it also placed her in the center of controversy, as the case became inseparable from the arguments over belief, skepticism, and sensationalism. Investigators from the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, traveled to Stephenville and interviewed witnesses. By then, the number of reported sightings had expanded considerably, including reports from different dates and locations. This now created another challenge. The original January 8th event became mixed together with later sightings, rumors, and now secondhand stories. Claims involving hundreds of witnesses are often repeated, but the number of well-documented witnesses to the central event is smaller than the total number of people who eventually contacted investigators or the media. This does not invalidate the original reports, but it means the Stephenville story must be handled carefully. There was not one perfectly documented object seen simultaneously by hundreds of people from verified locations. There was instead a cluster of reports, some detailed, some brief, some contradictory, occurring against a background of confirmed military flight activity. So what actually happened over Stephenville? One possibility is that witnesses saw 10 F-16s conducting training operations. Bright formation lights, flares, and a change in perspective created the appearance of a huge, fast-moving object. That explanation may account for at least some of the reports, but it does not comfortably explain why every account, particularly Sorrell's description of a large metallic object close to the ground, but his observation was primarily a single witness event, and no clear photos or physical evidence was ever produced. Another possibility is that the residents saw a mixture of unrelated things: military jets, commercial aircraft, stars, maybe even an actual unidentified aircraft, but once the first newspaper story appeared, separate experiences have become joined into one larger narrative. And then there's the possibility favored by many UFO researchers, that the jets and the unidentified radar target were separate, and that the military aircraft were responding to something genuinely unusual. The existing evidence does not allow for that possibility to be proven, but neither does it permit every report to be neatly resolved either. The radar analysis detected unidentified returns, but radar alone could not tell us what they were. The eyewitnesses described something extraordinary, but eyewitness testimony, as usual, cannot establish an object's origin. The military confirmed extensive flight activity, but its initial denial damaged confidence in its later explanation. What remains is a case built from overlapping pieces: some credible witnesses, some imperfect memories, confirmed fighter aircraft, unidentified radar returns, and the absence of a decisive photograph of any kind of craft or any physical evidence at all. Perhaps that is why the Stephenville lights remain so compelling. The incident didn't occur decades ago in an era of incomplete records. It happened in 2008 in controlled American airspace near military facilities, and during an evening where radar data still existed. The witnesses were not presenting a single, perfectly consistent story, just ordinary people struggling to describe something they didn't understand. Some definitely could have misidentified military activity, some definitely could have overestimated what they saw, but several remained adamant that the object was enormous, silent, and unlike any aircraft known to them. The Stephenville incident offers no final answer. It offers something much more uncomfortable. A night when dozens of people looked into the same Texas sky, military jets were confirmed to be flying, radar recorded targets that we could not identify, and no explanation satisfied everyone. Whatever moved over Stephenville on January 8th, 2008, it didn't leave a wreckage or any photos and no official resolution, just some lights in the darkness and some jets racing after them. And witnesses who, years later, continue to insist that for a few extraordinary minutes, the sky above their quiet Texas community belonged to something they had never seen before. That's it for that story. Now, my personal thoughts on it, it definitely was kind of interesting. I'll admit I wasn't following too closely when this actually happened. I do remember seeing it, some various news reports through the UFO circles, but the jets being out there is always cool. Like the fact that there was 10 F-16s now confirmed, that does sound pretty extreme as a response to just a craft going overhead when we've heard of bigger, like mass sightings that didn't have nearly the same kind of military response. So the fact that they could have been doing some sort of training maneuvers does sound reasonable to me. But at the same time, I don't think a lot of people, like in a town that close to a base where 10 jets being overhead isn't considered a big deal by the military, where that's just, oh yeah, that was just our jets, don't worry about it. I would think people local to that town are kind of used to seeing jets in the sky, like military aircraft, and probably are less likely to misidentify it. But again, it's very tough to say, and it's very easy to misidentify things, especially at night, and especially with the speeds these things could have been moving. The unidentified radar returns, though, that is also, it's definitely interesting. My gut tells me that something was in the sky. What it was, I don't think we'll be able to know. But anyway, guys, thanks for checking out this first podcast episode. Hopefully you enjoyed the format. I'm probably going to do one more of these before I come up with my next video project, which is going to be something a bit bigger, probably a bit too big for my skills so far, but we'll check back for that. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, all that stuff. It'll really help. And leave a comment, not even for the algorithm. I'd just like to know that someone was watching. Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.